Crowds of protesters and a repressive police response. It's a scene familiar all over Europe. But what about Georgia, though? Who has more to fear? The government, Russia, or the protesters? Protesters may think they have history on their side. Opponents may want to halt it or at least delay it. So join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The rigging of Georgia's October parliamentary elections in favor of the Russia-friendly Georgian Dream party and its decision to put Tbilisi's EU ambitions on hold have driven tens of thousands of Georgians into the streets to protest. They were met with water cannons, tear gas, and police batons. This is a video shared by Georgia's pro-EU president showing masked police officers allegedly raiding the office of opposition politicians and brutally beating them. The crackdown ordered by the pro-Russian Georgian Dream party shows that Moscow has not forgotten the damage color revolutions have dealt to its authority in other post-Soviet republics. In an early foreshadowing of pro-independence transitions elsewhere, the Chechen Revolution in the early 1990s proved that Russia may not be able to salvage the whole body of the rotting Soviet behemoth. The Chechens managed to wrestle out their sovereign state, Ichkeria, which would exist until the year 2000, when Russian forces captured its capital, Grozny. November 2003 saw the Rose Revolution bloom in Georgia. Unfolding in the wake of disputed parliamentary elections, this nonviolent change of power brought about the resignation of President Eduard Shevardnadze and an end of the Soviet-era leadership in the country. Just like in Georgia, indignation and opposition to massive corruption, voter intimidation, and electoral fraud in the 2004 Ukrainian presidential election runoff made Ukrainians take to the streets of Kyiv en masse to demand market-based economic and political reforms. Only several months later, Kyrgyzstan saw the Tulip Revolution overthrow President Askar Akayev. The reason for the public unrest was Akayev's alleged intention to continue ruling the country through one of his two children, both of whom got the highest results in the rigged 2005 presidential election. Now, Moscow is risking losing its grip on Tbilisi again in circumstances similar to those that triggered the previous color revolutions. Depending on how the protests in Georgia continue, the country may share the fate of the failed Belarusian Revolution of 2020 or see Georgia's Georgian Dream go up in smoke.
I'm delighted to welcome our guest today, Professor Grigor Yulukidze of the Caucasus University. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure to be here.
We have this picture of, from the media reports at least, of youthful opposition allied with the Georgian president herself, a very authoritarian, increasingly authoritarian government, governing party. Is David and Goliath? I suppose that's the thing we get: the street versus authority. Is this an accurate representation of what's happening in Georgia, or is it a far more complex, nuanced picture?
Well, unfortunately, the picture is far more complex because we are entering in the very, very complicated political reality in which a newly elected parliament, which has not been recognized by the key Western allies of Georgia, is formed of 89 members of parliament only from the ruling party. Other 61 from the opposition flank refuse to join the parliament, which makes the situation even more complicated. This new parliament is not able to form political groups, adopt state budget, and make constitutional changes. Apart from that, we see the huge challenge in terms of the legitimization of new parliament by the local society, and it is visible not only in the capital city but also in other large, I would say, towns of country. Right now we see mass demonstrations in Kutaisi, Batumi, Tel Aviv, and in addition to this dramatic picture we see the intention of President Zurabishvili not to give legitimization to this political reality and refuses to leave her office once her term is ended.
How do you break this impasse? You mentioned three scenarios, all of which you weren't particularly positive about. Could you give us an idea of how the possible outcomes could be? What the possible outcomes
Well,
could be?
with your permission, I would like to repeat these scenarios. The first scenario, we will see the internal disintegration of the Georgian Dream because the decision of the Prime Minister and ruling party to suspend any kind of negotiation and cooperation with the European Union until 2028 evoked huge and mass protests, not only among ordinary citizens, but also among the employees of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Defense, Central Bank, etc., etc.
Yes, diplomatic corps as well.
Yes, a lot of ambassadors resigned because it is impossible to think about the future of Georgia without the European perspective, because the only alternative is Russia. This is the first scenario. The second scenario is quite pessimistic, I would say, for Georgia, because it will lead to the complete victory of the Georgian Dream, and we will see isolated version of this Eastern European country, which once used to be the front runner in the association trio among, together with Ukraine and Moldova. And this isolation will be also accompanied by various international sanctions, and for the Georgian economy it's going to be devastating. And the third scenario is quite dramatic, and I hope that we will not see this scenario. It might be something similar to Euromaidan, and the current state of affairs show that nothing can be figured out because the police is applying excessive force against the demonstrators without any need. But also, we could analyze potentially the fourth scenario in which the government withdraws its decision, makes a compromise, and organizes early parliamentary elections. But this, I would say, solution seems unrealistic under these circumstances.
You mentioned, as we were talking, the increasing authoritarianism of the Georgian Dream. Could you give us an outline of why they're doing this?
Well, there are a lot of opinions in this regard. First of all, we have to underline the intention of the ruling team to drag Georgia into the Russian sphere of influence, because there is no other explanation to the decisions and the facts that we saw over the past few months in this Eastern European country. Another issue is the fear, which is, I would say, quite rational, because when you are in that geopolitical area where Russia has a huge advantage, I mean, South Caucasus and the
very close
extreme part of the Eastern Europe, the phobia and the fear towards Russia, it is quite understandable, especially if we take into consideration that actually right now, 20% of the territory of Georgia is under the Russian occupation, and Russian tanks are stationed 30 kilometers away from the capital city. And also there we can talk about the financial benefits, the lack of the West to be effective in terms of defending its interests, because over the last 20 years, Georgia has been one of the main points and one of the main elements of the U.S. interest in the region, once beacon of democracy, and the strategic partnership with Washington, and all these have been lost over the past 6 months.
It seems a very quick collapse in Western activity. The EU is very far away. Russia is very close. You mentioned the geopolitical factors in there. Wouldn't it be a rational way of acting is to accommodate yourself to this geopolitical situation? Geography, after all, we can't escape.
Accommodate, yes, but to seize everything and lose everything, no. Because one thing is to have a rational fear toward the perpetrator, which is Russia. But another issue is to give everything that has been achieved over the last 30 years within several months, lose and damage strategic partners with the West, and damage this story by the decisions that will lead, finally, we have to admit, to the huge and a tremendous isolation of Georgia. And I remind you that Georgia is not Belarus, is not Iran, will not be able to come out from this deep potential economic crisis.
Is that something that the West, one of the mistakes that the West has made is that it can't conceive of Georgia as a European country, great Christian tradition, Western Christendom, that sort of thing, and it just can't seem to be able to pursue its interests because it always seems to give way to the naked power, I suppose, of Russia.
Well, the policy of appeasement has been, I would say, completely failed. Unfortunately, this approach that if you make compromises to Russia, then Russia will respond adequately, once again showed its total failure. And partially your question, I would say, includes the answer. Yes, the perception of Georgia has never been serious in the top and decision-maker Western countries. Unfortunately, the main decisions have not been taken in the eastern and central part of Europe. And it led to the reality in which we are. War in Ukraine, the critical situation before the parliamentary elections in Moldova, presidential elections in Romania, which have been annulled by the Constitutional Court, and Georgia, which is being loosed on a daily basis.
It seems to be a battle for the opinion, for the hearts and minds, if we can use that phrase, of the countryside, of the non-urban middle-class elite. Mm-hmm. We see them on the streets of Tbilisi. And you mentioned before that that's what the West is bad at doing. Russia, on the other hand, has won the propaganda battle, or its traditions have won the propaganda battle for these, for the countryside rather than the towns.
Well, the idea of Euro integration of Georgia is still very popular. More than 75% of Georgians theoretically support country's future in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union. From this point of view, Russia has failed because it has never been able to offer something in return. Russia was always very weak in terms of offering the attractive elements of power. And
it used to offer communism, I suppose, in one sense.
Yes. And the only reason why some marginal parts of Georgian society have nostalgia towards communism is because of the fact that Georgia has not become yet a richer state than it was during the Soviet era. And not all Georgians understood what really the Euro integration might be for the country. And from this point of view, the West was quite weak and did not manage to achieve huge results. But the biggest problem, once again, I repeat, is the lack of political will. We have seen how the Georgian Dream has turned into openly pro-Russian force. And I remind you the words of the chairman of the Georgian parliament, Mr. Papuashvili, who said that it would be a catastrophic outcome for the Georgian economy if Georgia becomes the EU member country, because it would lead to the annihilation of strategic trade partners, strategic agreements with our strategic partners, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. And we see this daily changing their narratives.
But isn't that a rational fear, if we can call it that, to have against EU membership? For example, when Poland, I remember debates in Poland by people whom I used to know, family in the East, and who lost all the trading relationships with Belarus and Russia and beyond, mm-hmm. because Poland went into the Western sphere. So is that not a rational thing to
It is not, about? Actually, because if we pay attention to the growth of only one sector, I'm talking about the winemaking sector, in which Georgia is quite
thousands of years
yes.
tradition.
We see how the quality of Georgian wine has improved noticeably over the past 10 years. Why? Because they started to produce high-quality wine for the Western markets. And it not only the improvement of the wine quality, but also these winemakers have become the beneficiaries of the benefits and the outcomes that potential membership might bring to Georgia.
So the economic case for a Western alignment for membership of the EU, is that being made strongly enough, or is that not being made strongly enough?
No,
or is the Russian propaganda machine making their case for alliance with Russia stronger?
Well, the main reason of the efficiency of the Russian propaganda, first of all, is once again the geopolitical location of Georgia. If Georgia were on the place of Baltic countries, Romania and Bulgaria, of course, the situation would have been different. But look at the narratives of Russia, Russian propagandists, and unfortunately the representatives of the ruling team, that they repeat over and over the topic of war, which is quite traumatizing for a lot of Georgians, because we experienced 3 wars with Russia over the 30 years. That's a rational fear, but the repetition of this rational fear and replacing other very important political topics with the repetition of these traumas, once again illustrates how effectively it is used for propagandistic reasons. And we saw it during the pre-election period, when the main narrative of the Georgian Dream was no positive agenda, but also the menace. If we lose these elections, I mean the Georgian Dream, there will be a war. And that's why a lot of Georgians who are not, the experts in international relations, genuinely voted for them.
Yes, people will always vote for safety, I suppose, but you mentioned, of course, the manipulation of fear as a policy. Professor Ulukidze, thank you very much for coming on.
My pleasure.
Great pleasure to have you. So that's all we have time for. Do join us next time for How We Got Here.